Great.
There you go.
Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome.
All right, so I will call the meeting to order at 6:03. This is the special meeting of the Plan of Conservation and Development Subcommittee for Thursday, July 21st. We have 3 of the 4 members here, so we have a quorum. That's myself and Karen and Adam. And the first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our special meeting, approve the special meeting minutes of June 16, 2022.
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes of that date. And
Great.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Karen. Any discussion?
I skimmed through it. I couldn't find, it's such a big thing. So I couldn't find anything that stuck out to me as to edit or correct.
Okay, great. Yeah, me too. So then all those in favor, so signify by raising your hand and saying aye. Motion carries. Okay, then the next thing on the agenda is, I think, the meat of the evening is the review the compilation of comments from the public informational meeting held on June 30, 2022. Glenn put together a document that I think he's going to review with us tonight, and I will turn it right over to you, Glenn.
Great, Matt, thank you very much. So I wanted to try to capture for the commission the various comments that were raised at the public informational section and in correspondence which occurred before and after, and then organize it by the various sections and pages of the plan to try to make it easier for us to walk through. I then took the next step, and I looked at the nature of the comment, and I thought it might be helpful for the committee if I characterize them as things that probably, I think, make sense to include in the plan, and put some thought into how that could be done. I thought there were some comments that no change was necessary in the plan, either because, there was a question from Yost, for example, about really the Sharon Land Trust owns land in Ken. The answer is yes, they do. So there's no change that's required in the plan for that. And then the third category I marked as discuss, and these are areas that an issue's been raised, and it's either counter to what is in the plan or not in the plan. Maybe we should kind of talk about it and figure out how we would like to approach that. And so I think some direction from you would be helpful for me. I think I see the next step in the POCD process is that based on our conversations here tonight, I'm going to go ahead and make changes to incorporate this, and those will be redlined, so that we can take one final look through that and then send it off to the commission, or just send that off to the commission. It'll be the subcommittee's call. And then perhaps based on their review, we might move towards adoption. So if we start to approach this as being sort of perhaps a consent agenda, I'm not trying to put words in the committee's mouth, but I think we can move through these purposefully. If you sort of agree with the general assessment, maybe no conversation or discussion is necessary. We don't have to talk about each one. But if there are things in the list that you say, wait a second, I have a concern about that or the way it's worded, then we can call that out and try to clarify. Does that sound like a reasonable way to proceed for everybody? Okay. So I think I'll start to just kind of go through and tee up page by page and keep notes as we go. So here on page 1 is the introduction to the plan. I think the biggest comment here was really this concept of equity, which I think we can actually put into the first paragraph. And then I think the other comments in this section are fairly minor overall. Any questions on this page in terms of the edits that are being suggested? Okay.
Glenn, before we go into this, in the table of contents, and this is a comment via my wife, who has to be on the selectmen's meeting, which is right now. So her concern was this: there's no section that says conservation.
Yep.
She thinks that there are 2 clear areas that really would fall under conservation. And she's wondering if you in the table of contents, if you put a section that says, I'm not looking at it, so I can't tell what, I
Yeah.
wouldn't know if I looked at it, but, make it conservation and then have those two chapters right underneath it. It's the planning, it's the plan of conservation and development. And there's no conservation heading in the, so
So I actually have this keyed up, Adam, on page 9, because
Okay.
that's sort of where the issue first came up. So I do think that we should address that and incorporate something. And so if you can hang on till we get to page 9.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yep.
fine. I thought it was in the table of contents, and that's why before we got rolling, I thought I should. bring it up.
Okay, and I put it on page 9, so hold on to that thought if you will.
Okay, thank you.
The next page, which is page 3 here, I think almost most of the comments that we got had to do with the issue of sustainability. And people are kind of advocating for some more specificity with regard to particular comments, et cetera, on this section. And so I put together some ways that we could address and incorporate this. The first item on the top of page 3 is identified as discussed. And this is perhaps putting a statement in the overview of the plan that sustainability is an issue which kind of runs through many of the chapters of the plan. And we could actually put a little icon or something in the sidebar, which would give us the opportunity throughout the plan to put something that says, yes, this topic here directly relates to sustainability. So what are your thoughts or comments about having sustainability run through the plan and having call outs on some of the pages about sustainability issues?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that people are looking for, even if they don't know what that means, honestly, but they know the word. So if they look in here and they see sustainability, and then they can start to understand as they read these things, okay, this falls under, a sustainability topic, and they can start to understand what those things are.
Yep.
So your suggestion, Glenn, is that you could add this to overview page 5, but on page, the overview on page 5, we do have sustainability strategies as one of the 4.
Yeah, I think what I'd probably do here, Matt, is to put something in the sidebar on this page, which would be a little icon. I mean, it's a green leaf with a K for Kent or something like that. And say throughout the plan, when this icon shows up, it's because this concept or discussion relates to sustainability. And maybe there might be a short blurb underneath it that this relates to, energy conservation or diversifying transportation and sort of things like that. So yes, sustainability is one of these 4 boxes, but we'd introduce the concept of an icon in the sidebar, which would then could then be used in the remainder of the plan.
I like that. I think sustainability is an important topic, and it's certainly on everybody's lips. And I think it means different things to different people, but let's identify it as a topic that's important.
I think that's the important thing, that I think it does vary. The concept of sustainability varies for different people. That's why in the discussion in the plan, we talk about economic sustainability and climate sustainability and energy sustainability and all of these other things, and try to frame as it's not just necessarily what you think sustainability is. It has multiple facets to it, and kind of bring that all together. So I think this could be a good way to start to get that point across. The next major comment here was from the Conservation Commission, and they're kind of advocating for some more specificity with regard to climate sustainability and energy goals. I went through their comments. I think there is the opportunity to add some materials here, which I've identified. And the only clarification that's come up in the meantime is that the Conservation Commission's communication talked about a newly formed Kent Clean Energy Task Force. And that turns out it's not actually an official entity of the town. It's kind of a grassroots organization. So I think we might take the capitals off of that or something like that and express it in that way. So I think these additions here report what the state's objectives are with regard to greenhouse gas emissions and other things, and pick up on the comments we received from the Conservation Commission. So they suggested we make that change. Does that sound okay?
I think it all sounds okay, except I would, I'm a little bit reluctant to reference a group that is somewhat under the auspices of the Conservation Commission. I think it's a great idea, this Clean Energy Task Force, but I think that I think they're falling under the auspices of or they should fall under the auspices of a current group. And I think that they do, if I'm not mistaken, with the Conservation Commission. I think that's where they should stay. They're not a town agency.
Yep.
They seem to not want to meet in public. So I guess I would just leave that as an adjunct.
No, I think that's a great observation. My suggestion here, Matt, might be to, in the red section here on the page, I say, add the following with the Kent Sustainability Team, the Kent Conservation Commission, and Clean Energy Task Force as leader partners. And I think what we might do is just modify this a little bit. So it's the Sustainability Team, the Conservation Commission, and in the text, find a way to perhaps say other organizations who are interested in sustainability are going to contribute to this as well. But I think we can not be that specific and be okay.
I was going to say the same thing, honestly. I was hesitant to list a non-town entity, something that's a new grassroots. We have no idea where they're going to go and what they're going to start to advocate for, honestly. And I'm hesitant to today, in today's world, to start adding somebody who some group that we really know nothing about.
Yep. I'm now over onto page 4, and roughly in the middle of the page here, there are some comments made about the Transportation and Climate Initiative program, the CPACE program, and I think some other comments in here about creative placemaking and other things like that. And I think many of these can be added in either in sidebars and other places here. And to me, a sidebar is a way to sort of identify something that the town is already doing or could do. It's not really sort of the main line in the plan. But I think that we could go and make those changes. And particularly, I'm talking up to item number 18. How does the committee feel about those?
So I'm going by my notes, Glenn, and the document seems to be just a little bit different. My question on number 11,
Yep.
Which sort of falls out of the previous page, is how do we promote incentives for things like changing the building code and clean energy incentives? Is that something that we have to worry about, that we put into the plan, how it's going to work?
I think the issue of the building codes, which is something which is outside of municipal control, outside of the control of the Planning and Zoning Commission and others. So I had grouped 11 in with numbers 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, kind of grouped all of those together. And my feeling is we're not going to identify those issues specifically. We're going to support the concept of sustainability, of energy conservation. It turns out over the next 5 to 10 years that progress can be made in that area. The town can advocate for that, either the Conservation Commission or Clean Energy Task Force and others. But the idea about incentivizing adoption of the new building code is a pretty significant recommendation, which is outside of our control. And I think we wasn't going to suggest that the commission should get involved in recommending that.
Okay, and then even the incentivization I wish there was a better word for that.
I know.
The use of clean energy technologies and energy conservation. I mean, it's a great idea to provide incentives for those things. But I would feel more comfortable about having those things in the POCD if I understood that it's not the role of the POCD to figure out what those incentives are.
And I think therein lies the challenge as part of the POCD. We certainly want to embrace the thoughts and the input from others. And the issue is, what are these initiatives and incentives? And planning zone is not likely to come up with these. Other people are, and they can do that. And I think the language I'm suggesting to be incorporated here would promote those kinds of efforts, but without the specificity about things like building audits for better energy efficiency, or incentives for decarbonizing, or other things like that. I'm not sure that we need that level of specificity.
Okay, great. And then in number 17 is I'm not quite sure what creative placemaking is.
It's really looking at small areas and identifying things that could be done to enhance the sense of place in the area or the characteristics that make it special. So it's a bit of a challenge here in the plan. I believe that the sustainability team has identified a number of things that they get points for in their application to Sustainable Connecticut or to Sustainable CT, which helps get Kent a bronze, a silver, or platinum, I think, designation for sustainability. And so recommending creative placemaking in the plan gets you the points. So I don't think there's a downside to it, Matt. I don't know if the commission would undertake this effort in the next 10 years or whether sustainability team would be able to get some money to do something. But it's this concept about having it in the plan as a way to get points. So I think it's okay.
Okay, fine.
The one I think which is a talker for us a little bit is number 19. So if you go back to pages 6, 7, and 8 in the booklet that I put together, this comes from the sustainability team, and the Sustainable CT has a concept of sustainability in action, I think that they call it, sustainability concepts in action. And they are advocating for some of these statements to be included in the plan. And the question is, which ones? All of them? I mean, how do they sort of do this? Now, in the plan right now today, on pages 22 and 23 of the POCD, we have these two blue pages which describe sustainable CT actions. And then this is now another dimension that they have come up with about, land use patterns or municipal programs, etc. So we can ignore the statements that were submitted by the sustainability team. But my thought also was that we could take pages 6, 7, and 8 here, which look sort of like this, which it describes here what the concept is, gives some examples. And my thought would be in this blue box, then on the bottom of the page, we would identify things Kent is doing already, or the plan recommends in the future to do, to demonstrate again the focus on sustainability moving forward. So it wouldn't embrace everything under these categories, because I think everything under these categories starts to get a little bit scary in terms of some of the protections, but to embrace sort of the concept about sustainability concepts and action. And so I think the choices perhaps for the subcommittee here would be ignore these recommendations because it adds 3 pages and it's a little bit scary, or incorporate them and use the blue boxes to kind of describe what Kent is already doing, or I think embrace all of these concepts And I think that's the one that makes me the most nervous, because I think there are some recommendations in here that might not be compatible with other strategies in the plan. So I kind of chose a middle road here. And what I'd like to do is put this together, and I think in the next draft, you would then get a chance to see it and say, okay, we're okay with this addition of these 3 pages, and see how that works out. What's your thought on that one?
Well, I think that these concepts belong in the POCD. So for me, it's just a question of the best way to get them in there. And, you know, adding 3 pages is, you know, it's not the worst thing.
No, I don't want to suggest that it has anything to do with the number of pages. I think that the concepts are useful, Matt. But some of the sub-statements in here, let me find one that I thought was benchmarking the purchasing of green products. Who's going to do that at town hall? Audit energy use of buildings and public facilities. I'd like to think that the Clean Energy Task Force might take this on, but are we going to assign this responsibility to them? Conduct land use analyses to determine locations and density for a diversity of housing type. I think we're already addressing that one. The one that was in here that I started to get nervous about, I think it had to do with large scale solar. I'm trying to find out where that one is. Large scale wind.
Yeah, that was on the, that
You know,
was.
you can never find it
starting
when
on
you
20
want
and
it.
21.
Say,
In this document that we're looking at now, page 4 and 5 and 20 and 21.
yeah. But I think there was also something here, Matt, in the concepts in action.
Oh,
So I think, again, I tried to take a middle of the road approach, which identifies these sustainability concepts in action, what the 6 concepts are, the description that is used by Sustainable CT, and then a box below which explains again what Kent has done, is doing, and might do in the future. I think is a way to demonstrate Kent's attention to sustainability issues, past, present, and future.
what do you think about not including the individual concepts, but referencing the individual concepts and then using your idea for the text box discussing how the how these concepts are integrated into POCD. So rather than adding all that text, we could say, you know, the Sustainable CT has sustained this section called Sustainability Concepts and Actions, and there's 9 of them, or I'm sorry, there's 6 of them.
Yep.
And this is how the POCD it addresses some of the items in each of those 6. You know,
Yeah, I think that I'd probably stick with the same format here, Matt, in terms of 2 columns on the page, but cherry pick some of the lettered comments to put into the blue box
Okay.
and say, you know, so it would have the introductory italicized statement, which is sort of what Sustainable CT is meaning by this. And then we'd have the blue box discussing what Kent has done or is doing, and it would reflect some of the text in the box.
Yeah, I think I'm not terribly opposed to the way you've got it laid out now, just maybe thinking about streamlining it. So you'll think about it, Glenn, and come up with some.
Yeah, I think I will. So I think, again, the next step I believe would be for me to now make these changes in the document in red line, have it come back to the subcommittee. You'd look at it and say, yes, Glenn, we're comfortable with these changes, or I didn't understand that this is going to come out like this. I'd like to modify sort of the text, and then we bring that back to the commission. So I'll take a shot at this and see what comes up.
Great.
On comment number 20 on the bottom of page 4, we did have this larger scale, the recommendation for larger scale solar, wind, and energy storage options. And I think that's the scale question that I wanted to bring back to the subcommittee to kind of talk about here. Larger scale wind can be, major wind turbines. And with all the work that Kent has done on the Horizon Line Conservation District and some of the other issues in town, it didn't seem that large scale wind fit in well with what has been our historic thinking. And the same thing with large scale solar. There are examples from around the state where, farmland is being converted to solar and other large scale solar operations. And we hadn't really talked about larger scale as part of the plan. I do recall a conversation along the way that suggested the commission wasn't particularly interested in the larger scale stuff, so it didn't end up in the POCD in a meaningful way. But I want to make sure I capture what your thoughts are on this. So what's your reaction to comment number 20?
Well, I think that it's worth, considering larger scale, but we should tie it back to, I think, some of the protections that we've already got for open farmland and horizon line and hilltop preservation. So if we could find a balance between these larger scale energy production with this large scale energy production and preservation of the rural character, then I think it could be all right. I mean, the Kent School seems to be doing a nice job of really solarizing their campus, and it's not very obtrusive. It's very unobtrusive. So I think
we just approved. I don't know if I'd call it large scale, and I don't know if I'd call what the Kent School is doing large scale. But we just approved an application by the South Kent School for putting up a bunch of panels, on the ground. It's three different rows. But I'm not. So when we talk about large scale, I mean, I guess I don't have a problem with the POCD saying that, that we could recommend this. It doesn't mean that there ends up being a piece of land in Kent that if brought before us would be something that worked. I'm not sure how to.
No, I'm with you. I think this has been very helpful because I think the comment here, the approach would be that what we're looking at is perhaps enabling appropriately scaled facilities of this type. We're open and receptive to them, but we want to balance this with our thoughts over the years in terms of farmland preservation, the horizon line, and as Matt pointed out, the rural character of Kent. So maybe the concept here is explore or try to figure out how to balance sustainability with character. So that we can do as much as we can and balance it with other resources.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that if we started filling all of the fields and meadows that people can see from the road with solar panels, if that is a rural look. I don't think that's a rural look. I think it starts becoming an industrial look, and that's exactly what our POCD and I think what our charge is not to do is we're looking to keep a rural character.
Yep. And I think there's a situation here in Simsbury where I live. They took some former tobacco land and they put a very large solar farm on it, but they also did a nice job with berms and fences and preserving tobacco barns that these are behind. So realistically, the visual impact of it is extremely modest. And so there could be ways to kind of do all of that. And I think that starts to then strike at the concept of balance and incorporating new ideas in appropriate ways. So let me take a shot at some of that language and see what it comes back with.
Okay.
Great.
Um, Yeah, so comment number 23, the sustainability team in their correspondence asked to be a partner on almost anything in the POCD that related to things that they have talked about. And I think, yes, Kent's sustainability team will likely be involved in a number of the recommendations in the POCD, but not all of them as leaders or partners. And so I think the suggestion here, rather than in every sort of implementation table, keep throwing in KSD, have a global statement here on page 23 or so that essentially says Kent sustainability team are expected to be involved in many of these sustainability recommendations, and their participation is welcome. Because the
Why is that part of the POCD? I don't see making a statement like that as part as what the plan of conservation and development is. That I see that as maybe it's an important statement somewhere, but I'm just not sure that I understand why that comment is here in the POCD. That the sustainability team should be included in whatever that may be.
So I don't disagree with what you're saying, Adam. Sustainability has become defined in Connecticut as getting your designations from Sustainable CT. So these are the bronze, silver, and platinum designations. So they have a checklist where you get points for doing certain things, and communities have stopped thinking about sustainability as a broad concept and said, what can we cross off and get points for on the list? And they get points for being involved in things. So
Okay.
I'm trying to find a happy medium between giving them opportunities to get points to become more sustainable in the eyes of Sustainable CT without listing them on every possible strategy, because there's many things that they wouldn't necessarily be involved in. So I thought the general language here, and I think I need to pick those words carefully, is that they're expected to be the leader on many of these sustainability efforts, in coordinating with other entities, et cetera. And so we look forward to their participation. Are they going to be around in 5 to 10 years? I can't tell you that. It seems to me that perhaps once they've received designations, will they continue, or will they, become inactive? I don't know. It's not like a normal commission or committee established by the town, for example. So again, I was trying to strike a balance here that would show a commitment in the POCD to sustainability.
And I think that balance is important. I also think that we could very easily appoint them as the leader partner on every single thing and completely swamp that commission, that group with tasks that while they would try really hard to succeed at, we would likely be setting them up for failure because there's just too much to do, right?
Mhm.
So I think we have to be cognizant of, we have to be careful to not give them too much, just, because nobody can do everything.
Okay. And then I think in terms of on page 5, the remaining comments here have to do with the concept of resiliency. I think, again, number 27 here is that the Sustainable CT gives points for integrating at least 4 hazard mitigation plan goals into the POCD. We already recognize the hazard mitigation plan, and I think we can add some additional materials in here, which will strengthen that section overall. So I think that's a reasonable approach. Is everybody okay with page 5?
Yep.
Jumps us ahead now to page 9. Adam, so the first comment here on page 9, number 28, is the question that came up. Originally, I think the first draft of the plan had this section entitled conservation. And the idea was that there were some strategies in here which didn't necessarily reflect conservation, things like historic resources or character, et cetera. So we changed it to assets. But I think that the comment that was made, I think by Connie, which essentially said, listen, let's change the table of contents so that the chapter on sustainability is conservation/sustainability. And the other chapter now would be conservation/community assets. I think it all starts to come together. And then I think the other sections of the plan would be development, as in community development or, development areas and functions, and then also development/infrastructure. So conservation development clearly now starts to break it out into these other components. So I think that makes sense. And I think if the committee is okay with that, I'll go ahead and make that happen.
Yes, the Conservation Commission, when they first sent us comments back in June of 21, their recommendation was that we have sustainability, that we have conservation concepts throughout the plan. And I think we do that, but by doing that, we've made it a little bit more diffuse. So I think that their comments to have it front and center in the table of contents is good, and I think your solution, Glenn, is good. So
perfect. I think the next comments here on page 9 and 10 have to do with the natural resources section of the plan. There's some map changes, which I think are fairly straightforward. I think we have a number of comments with regard to Lake Warmlog, and I think that I've got a way to blend most of these comments together to reflect the fact that Lake Warmlog is a unique resource that falls in 3 communities and has 3 different entities that are involved with different aspects of it, and to focus in on that. I think the main comment I have here for discussion is comment number 32, which is I had felt, looking back at the section related to conservation development, it has an approach where resources are identified as primary or secondary. And the main purpose was that the primary are the ones that really have a major impact on development. These are not developable areas. They have significant natural resource functions, and those need to be, the ones where the first level of attention is given. And then the second ones would be stone walls and scenic views and other issues. And I realize as part of the work on the POCD that core forest area has been a concept in Kent for quite some time, but it didn't reflect in the conservation subdivision regulations. So I advocated and recommended that that be added in. And now the comments that have come back is, yeah, we think that should be added in, but we think you should get rid of this primary secondary distinction.
There are there's something called follow the forest, which is has to do with these core forest areas, and there's a bunch of maps that HVA has, and they're interesting, and I think they're relevant because what they show is these corridors that are here in Kent that continue to extend, and they go all the way up into Maine, all the way up into Canada. There are these natural corridors that are unbroken. And I think I think, adding some kind of a map or mentioning follow the forest, and some of these things would be interesting and get people to understand why you have these core forest areas, because just it being here in Kent is one thing. When you see that these core forest areas become these wildlife areas that extend for thousands of miles, there's actually, if I understand correctly, there's actually a larger uninterrupted core forest area through Follow the Forest here in the east that's bigger than any out west, which I still have a hard time believing, but apparently it's true. So I think that that's something that, adding follow the forest in some way, or pointing to some of these, or one of these maps that HVA has that shows these.
Yeah, I mean, I think, let me see what I can find in terms of that. I think the crux of the issue in comment number 32 is whether the POCD should recommend eliminating the primary and secondary categories and just blur them all together so that an environmental analysis would be done of a property, and maybe on some properties it's wetlands and floodplain are the key resources, and other properties it could be scenic views and forest, rather than this primary, secondary, which wasn't meant to be a way of, elevating certain resources and de-escalating other resources, but that's the way it sort of has been perceived. So what's the committee's pleasure in terms of this? Revisit the regulations to get rid of those, or just say in the plan directly, get rid of the primary, secondary, or what's your thoughts?
I don't think we should say anything directly in the POCD. I think that that's a regulation function, right?
Yep.
So, but I think that we should be sensitive to the comments that have been made. I wonder, clarify for me, Glenn, that the 50% open space, my understanding, it's a 50%, I didn't think it was that high, but 50% open space, as is described here in this document, can be made up of any of those primary or secondary conservation areas, correct?
Yes.
So it's not as if we are taking, it's not as if we're doing a calculation where we take the developable land, which is the land with the total land less the wetlands and the steep slopes and any of those primary or secondary. Actually, no, it's just the undevelopable, right? So it's the steep slopes and the wetlands, and then those become de facto preserved, and then you have to conserve or preserve 50% on top of that.
No, I think the idea was on the entire parcel, half of it has to be preserved as open space in a meaningful way. It doesn't necessarily have to be the land trust. It doesn't necessarily have to be a homeowners association, but there needs to be preservation of the environmental resources on the parcel. And so that the house sites would now consume 50% of the parcel. So the lot sizes might be a little bit smaller or might get reconfigured. You might recall a conversation we had on the zoning regulations where we talked about preserving farmland. And maybe we can put the houses at the edges of the farm field, and the farm fields would be preserved as open space. So the basic idea was to preserve meaningful amounts of open space rather than chewing it up with what we might call rural sprawl. So that was sort of the intention. And there was meant to be a priority placed on the primary resources, but also complemented by the secondary. So it was really a planning process that you would go, or an applicant would go through and come to the commission with a map of the property saying, here's where the primary resources are, here's where the secondary resources are. As we look at this, as Adam points out, follow the forest, that the natural sort of open space configuration parcel kind of flows this way. So that's what we base our development scheme on. And I think we could look at that and say that that's an environmentally sensitive way to get balanced development with conservation. That seems like a thoughtful plan. And we think a conservation approach is going to work here in that situation.
I thought that part of it was also, and not primarily, but it almost creates an incentive for the developer not to develop on steeper slopes and not to encroach on wetland areas and keep those more sensitive areas green and build on the easier areas.
I think that the regulations have an incentive that you don't have to meet rigid frontage and other requirements to build roads and extend further into these sensitive areas, that you could identify the conservation areas, and then the other areas you could cluster houses to stay away from those. So I think we're talking sort of both sides of the same situation.
And also, you know, it's wetlands are federally regulated, right?
Well, in Connecticut, there's two different ways that wetlands are regulated. We have a federal designation, which is essentially sort of biology based. And then in Connecticut, our approach here in this state is soil based. So the soil has to meet the characteristics. It doesn't matter if, you know, certain species live there. Connecticut just is based on soil type. Federal is based on biology.
So I guess my question is, and I don't want to belabor this because I think this is getting in too deep for the POCD, but it seemed to me that that we could allow for, the regulation could allow for development on steep slopes. Like, let's talk about 227 North Main, right? So that parcel is on town sewer, or it's going to be on town sewer. And what would this regulation do to that application, right? So if we change the regulation to have the primary and secondary as, or eliminate the primary and secondary, have them all lumped in together, would then the commission or a developer be able to recommend building near a wetland or building on a steep slope, which we now identify as primary, in order to sort of save some other part of that parcel, like the piece that's closer to the road or the farmlands, and would that force us into developing on less than desirable parts of that property?
I'd like to think that the holistic process the commission might go through would balance the resources so that no sensitive areas would be adversely affected, that the net result would be a careful balancing of conservation while allowing reasonable development of a piece of property. So I felt when crafting the regulations for the commission's consideration that the primary secondary was going to be a good way to approach this, but there's a little bit of pushback on the primary secondary. So we can, I guess what I picked here, Matt, I wrote down here on my piece of paper, is revisit the primary secondary designations. And if the POCD says that, and the issue is, yeah, you know what? We may decide to leave it the way it is. We're going to add core forest in, but maybe we're still going to leave the primary secondary designation, or not. Maybe we'll change that. So I think if the committee's okay, I address this by simply saying revisit, add core forest in, and revisit the primary secondary designations at some time in the future.
Great. I'm in. Karen, you okay with that?
And I think what Adam said too, if I can find a good little map of follow the forest, I'll add that in on a sidebar because I think that is a concept too, which would be useful here.
You can check with Connie. She knows what
Yep.
You know, it's a
Thank
big land trust incentive, and she can tell you what she can give you her 2 cents.
Thank you. And then I've got, for the remainder of the natural resources section, some text here, which is going to explain, I think Alice had contributed some of the stuff in terms of the roles of the different entities up at Lake Warramog. So we're just going to add that in as a sidebar to explain the authority versus the task force versus the association. Good with that?
Yes.
Yep.
In terms of preserve open space, the comment here was number 42. There was a sidebar we put in, I forget where it came up in our process, but the observation was made about the tax implications of land conservation. It takes land off the tax rolls. And I think the Conservation Commission pointed out that that's really a much more nuanced conversation here. Because yes, it can take land off the tax rolls, but it can also enhance the value of land around it. So the net gain could be considerable. So I think rather than have the POCD spark or incite or inflame that debate, I think it's just easier to kind of take that comment, that statement out.
I think that's a good idea. There is a way that it balances it out, and it doesn't just take land off the tax rolls. It's not straightforward like that.
We definitely don't want to inflame.
So most of the other stuff having to do with open space is, I think, pretty straightforward. Just some minor changes or tweaks here in the text. No comments received on the farms and farming section. Cultural resources, just a couple of minor tweaks here that came up at the public meeting in terms of comments. I think the issue, no, that's in the next category, I'm sorry. Under community character, I had suggested possible addition of 2 character areas. One was what I called Cobble Hill, the area, the hill behind Town Hall. The second one was dirt roads. This is down in comment number, I'm down at 55 right now.
Mhm.
There's some pushback on both of those because they hadn't been in the original natural resource inventory. So I think that the general sentiment seems to be to eliminate dirt roads, the discussion of dirt roads and the discussion of Cobble Hill. So going to go ahead and make that change on the map.
Okay, I think that's fine. I think that dirt roads are, if we mention dirt roads in the POCD, then maybe we won't have in the near future those dirt roads paved, but.
So Matt, I should apologize. I'm sorry. What I did is I took them off this character list of character places and put them back in the transportation section. The whole concept of dirt roads is, we'll get to it back there. So it's not coming out of the plan overall. It's just not being called out as a character place in town, which now is sort of raised some other concepts.
Okay,
Right.
no, that's good.
I think that the dirt roads are part of what makes the rural character of our town, but I don't know if because they're all over, so I don't know if I call them a character area because they're everywhere,
Okay. No, that's fine. That's great. As long as we understand that dirt roads sort of are part of what makes us rural.
Yeah.
Another sort of major comment here was number 60. And this is about having to do with Public Act 490. And right now, Public Act 490 was in the section of the plan having to do with community character, because Public Act 490 encourages the retention of farm, forest, and other types of land. It very much contributes to the overall sense of rural character in Kent. But there was some observations in here that it's actually has many other benefits more than just character. It helps protect some of the sensitive natural resources. It contributes to farmland. It contributes to some of the other strategies in the plan. So the suggestion was made to elevate that conversation to the same level as character and farmland and other stuff. And I'm okay with that. So I just made the suggestion here in terms of changing that around. I think that will be okay. So that's comment number 60. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's because there is definitely land that's being used as farmland or ostensibly as farmland in Kent that's not in PA 490. That's not farm tax.
So I'm ready now to go over to
I'm
page
sorry,
13.
Karen, you were on mute. What'd you say?
No, I agree with you. I was just listening to you and I'm thinking, why wouldn't someone put it in 490 unless they have a hidden agenda to develop it? It's such a great classification for large parcels. So I think we should, I think the comment to elevate it is actually a good idea.
Okay.
So I'm on to page 13 now, which is the development section of the plan. There's a couple of things that came up in here. At the public meeting, we heard the comments about speed limits and crosswalks and some other information which could be added to make this more helpful. One of the comments that came in from Kent Affordable Housing, which is comment number 66, which was recommending that the town invest in acquiring or expanding the privately owned and maintained sewer within the Kent Green development. And it could be added as a sidebar on page 59 as an example of sort of tax increment financing, but this could be kind of a sensitive issue in terms of municipal investment in a private facility without additional discussion.
I honestly
So-
don't even think that it belongs in the POCD.
Okay.
You know, it's just a comment that they made. It's one, it's never going to happen, not ever. And, you know, it's a private property and it just doesn't, you know, there were a bunch of comments that, you know, were kind of wishful thinking. It was fine for them to make them, but I don't think that they belong in the POCD. And I don't think that one does. The town isn't going to acquire the Kent Greens, you know, sewer system.
All right, so the way that I had thought that maybe this could be addressed, Adam, was by putting in that public investment in sewer infrastructure could be an example of tax increment financing. In other words, if that now then spurs development of the property, we're getting tax revenue we would not otherwise have gotten. So the tax increment finance the infrastructure investment, but that's kind of a nuanced and advanced conversation. So if I understand the sentiment here, it's we're not going to do anything with regard to comment number 66. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, yes.
I don't think there's anything major here with regard to the Kent Village Center. I think we're good here with those changes. I think in terms of business and economic development, comment number 75 was raised about whether or not the POCD should make recommendations for the transformer, the cleanup of the Berkshire transformer site. And I think what we could do here is, I think it's a complicated site, right? Because of the history and the level of contamination and what might happen with that. We could add text suggesting additional study of the site and possible desirable future uses and just kind of leave it at that. I'm not sure that it needs.
There have been, again, here, this is a private property. It changed hands not all that many years ago. The people who bought it, they did some studies. You know, it's their property and it's not the town's business to clean it up. I mean, somebody one day who actually knows that they want to do something with the property, they're going to build something, they're going to do something to make money on it, then they'll have to address that. But I mean, I just don't see how it's not the town's business to clean it up because it's not the town's property.
Yep. Got it.
Although on the other hand, it is a property that's fairly well polluted, right? And it's the only one within the limits of the town. And you know, maybe it makes sense. It would be great if it were cleaned up. I understand it's private property, but that has not stopped us in certain instances in the past. The plan of conservation, not the planning and zoning, from identifying parts of town where we think that would benefit from something, you know, the incentive housing zone, or I think that's the only example I have. But you know, maybe it makes sense just to say that, you know, polluted sites we should work towards cleaning them up, and whatever, we should incentivize the cleaning of the
Or encourage. I think the idea here, again, without getting into the specifics of it, we could encourage that the sites be cleaned and put to the highest and best use. We're already advocating for the concept that we only have this small area of industrial zone land. We have to try to make as much out of it as we can. And that
I'm
site is,
totally interested in our incentivizing by saying, you know, we encourage it to happen.
Yep.
I'm just hesitant to say the town should be putting money into that.
no. Okay.
That becomes a deal
I
between
agree
whoever
with that.
owns it and wants to do it. and the town, and they can come, look, we want to put a business here. We need to
Yep.
clean this up. We want some tax breaks. This is what we're going to do. That's a deal for whoever wants to develop that
For a
property.
developer.
Yep.
Agreed.
But to say that, to identify it and to say, something that would be good for it to be cleaned up, I am all for that.
Got it. All right, I'll make that happen. The next comment was number 76. This is in residential development. David Birnbaum made the comment about what he called smart densification of development in the RU1 district. And as I sort of went through his comments, I think essentially what he's saying is allow for larger buildings or larger structures or houses to accommodate multiple units within it. So it'd still be the same number of units you might get on a piece of property, but instead of it being in 3, 4, or 5 buildings, it might be in 1. And I'm not sure economically who might do that. But I think that if somebody wanted to do that, the regulation shouldn't necessarily stop them. In other words, if you're going to get 5 houses on 20 acres, does it matter if those 5 houses are 5 separate houses or whether those 5 houses are agglomerated into one house that looks like a large residential house?
So I'll tell you my thought on this because what I see that as is a way for some of our very wealthy landowners to go plug in a bunch of houses. And the idea of this is to be able to create more housing and hopefully rental housing to the public. But I don't see that in Kent because the people who own these larger parcels of property, if they're not making a full out development, we're just giving them the ability to build more homes on their property so they can have more guests come up to visit them. They can have more family come up to visit them. My son and his family can stay in that house and my daughter and her family can stay in that house. And
You're talking like a family compound, Adam. And I think what I understood David's comments to be was not, multiple houses on one property. The state accessory dwelling units are going to start to address some of that. I understood these comments to be allow those 5 houses or units to be in one house. So it would be one building. And again, if on 20 acres, you can have 4 houses or 5, whatever the number would be. What if somebody wanted to put those 4 units in one building? Right now, we say, no, you can't do that. You have to subdivide it into individual lots or do accessory dwelling units or guest houses. So it's kind of a concept that I'm not quite sure why anybody would do it, but maybe somebody would, and the regs currently don't permit it. Or are we getting too deep into the weeds on this and just let it fly? What do you think?
I like the idea of having a discussion about housing units in the rural zone, right? So I think that maybe we can just tailor a comment in the Plan of Conservation and Development, which says that the recommendation of the POCD is that the Planning and Zoning Commission review its regulations regarding the number of units allowed in the rural zone. Because I think there's so many nuances here. What if we have it's an 8,000 square foot house that's allowed by the regulations, but the P&Z Commission doesn't have any teeth, any regulation or any seat at that table, which we don't have mostly in the rural zone. Somebody wants to build a house, it's allowed in the regulations, it's allowed in the district, they just go and build the house, and we don't get to say, what that house looks like or how. So I would say that we should look at the regulations, and there's definitely a debate to be had as to whether we should be encouraging dense housing within the village center, or whether we should be encouraging dense housing in some urban sprawl that is going to, in my opinion, maybe be detrimental to the rural character. So
Yeah,
I
I think
think it's a discussion.
I like your wording, because I think what this now sets it up is for possible future conversation. I wasn't envisioning that this, I was envisioning in the RU1, we would still use the soil-based approach to say, on this parcel of land, you get X number of units. You can either combine those, let's say 5 units, you can create 5 separate lots if you would like, or you can put those 5 units in one building, or you can subdivide it into 2 parcels and have, a small condominium on the parcel of some type. So you don't get more units, you just get more flexibility as to how you group those units on a parcel. And once you've locked it down, I mean, either through conservation easements or something else, you can't come back in the future and ask to subdivide or anything else again. No, we went through this. We agreed you got five units on your parcel and you made the decision, or somebody did, to do it this way. It is what it is. So, but I think your idea is, let's revisit that. I think is a reasonable way to go.
All right, good. Adam and Karen, you're okay with that? Yes?
Good with that.
Yes, I am too.
So comment number 79 was from Yost at the public informational meeting. And he wondered, you may recall, as part of our work on the incentive housing zone, we had the meadow area, and we had the incentive zone. We tried to allow for mixed income housing, but didn't require it or even necessarily incentivize it. So Yost's question was about that. I might have thought that recommendation would come from the Housing Steering Committee, but Yost brought it up. Do we want to address that or kick that can down the road? What's the committee's thought?
Somebody made a comment when we were looking at the preliminary review of the plan for that field to the south of Town Hall, right? And
Yep.
somebody made the comment that we don't require affordable units there, and I think that we do require affordable units. I'm sure that we do. I went back and I looked at the regulation, and we certainly do, and it's 85%. It's not the lower tier of affordability, but it's the highest tier of affordability. But how does that translate to this mixed income housing? Is mixed income housing where we require a certain amount of it to be affordable, or is it something different?
Now, that's the phrase which has come into common usage, which is that if we have a development that perhaps 80% of the units are at market rate, and then 20% of the units are deed restricted at affordable prices, that's then often called a mixed income development, because you have to income qualify for the lower units, and then the other units are simply at market rate. So
But it's not necessarily affordable housing. It's just,
well, I think with
like-
regard, I agree with what Matt was saying earlier. I think when we crafted the incentive housing zone regulation, we decided not to follow the state's dictates about minimum density. But what we did try to encourage there was a mix of housing, but there was an affordability component and requirement that went along with both of those. That's my recollection. So I don't have the regs open in front of me, but I'm going to take a look at that.
Well, that's my understanding, is that we do require that that overlay zone requires some percentage to be affordable for. Something tells me that's it's generational, but something also tells me that it's a time frame, 50 years or 70 years or 30 years or whatever it is.
I think it's
So
40.
I don't think if you agree with that, Glenn, my recommendation is that we don't have to include this in the POCD.
Okay. I'll take a look.
but that only has to do with the incentive housing zone, correct? And this comment is more general, isn't it? It's where is it? Yost.
Is
Number
it
79.
general, or is it just that?
Oh, so
that-
it's
that
just the housing
overlay?
overlays. It's just the housing overlays. Okay.
I mean, that's how I interpret it. I could be, I said, as you.
No, I think that's what it says. I just didn't realize it was saying the housing overlays. And I think our only housing overlay is the incentive housing zone.
Okay.
I believe so. It's an interesting question about incentivizing or requiring, but I think there's enough going on with the affordable housing plan that we're probably in good shape there. Comment 81. These were some very specific recommendations from Kent Affordable Housing about reducing minimum lot size, reducing the lot area required per unit, reusing or eliminating the 8-unit building cap. And so they're a little bit more specific than what came out of the affordable housing plan. So that because they're not in the affordable housing plan, we could not put them into the POCD, or we could put them into a sidebar to say, some of the specific regulatory changes that could be considered include, and then list them. What are your thoughts?
I definitely think that we could relook at our regulations, and is our parking regulations a little too difficult that it prevents somebody from being able to build an accessory dwelling that could be rented? Is the 4,000 square feet too much? I mean, I think we can. I think as a commit, I wouldn't want to put more than it's something that the Planning and Zoning Commission should look at and have a discussion about.
So I think my suggestion here would be a sidebar that says the commission could investigate or it could evaluate. So in other words, we're not saying these are recommendations in the POCD, but these are the types of language perhaps that could be impediments to housing, and these are things that could be revisited in the future. And moving ahead, I think could be a good way to approach that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've all agreed as on the full P&Z commission that we want to look at the parking regulations, right, within the village district, because we opted out of the whatever act that was.
Yeah.
And then also that we talked about it at our second to last meeting. What's it now? So it was the June meeting where we talked about revising the density question about within the village center. So I think those are things that the commission plans on reviewing anyway. So I think that the P&Z commission should revisit, investigate, whatever that language is, and I think that's a good idea.
Perfect.
Glenn, before you move off of page 14,
Yep.
I wanted to just slip back to item number 80.
Yep.
And this is the 5-year housing plan and the POCD 10-year update. And I know that there was a recommendation that the POCD update itself every 5 years. And is this the only place that that would come up in this report?
Well, I think I'd have to do a more detailed look, Matt, I think, because the general approach is the POCD does get updated every 10 years. So if we were now going to advocate for a 5-year so it stays in sync with the affordable housing plan, there is a provision in the statutes that says if the affordable housing plan is being updated at the same time as a POCD, then you can merge the two of them together and they wouldn't necessarily be independent documents. So I think here, if we want to advocate for a 5-year rolling update, an update doesn't have to be as major as this effort has been in terms of updating the plan. So it doesn't have to be this involved. I mean, the commission could do it just on a 5-year refresh look type of thing.
I am not an advocate for that.
Neither am I.
So I think that language in there that says that the housing plan is updated every 5 years, and the POCD recognizes updates to the housing plan. I think I would prefer to go that route rather than to go. And I know, I understand that it could be a less involved process if we do it every 5 years, or maybe we do a full update every 10 years and just do an intermittent update. I think that the Planning and Zoning Commission has enough to do.
Yep. Got it.
Honestly think there's a cost to it, to the town, and it adds to taxes, and maybe in a not a very meaningful way, but if you look at what's going on in our town now, our taxes are going up and up and up and up, and there's more infrastructure, and there seems to be more hiring, and it just we're gonna tax out the people who live here, and the town will have to become a weekender's place.
I think the issue that I think we could focus on here is my approach, or for your consideration, would be kind of a little bit of a separation between the affordable housing plan and the POCD. The affordable housing plan is a single purpose, single focus topic, updated every 5 years, and particularly to address the affordable housing situation, or the lack of affordable housing situation that is found across the state. The POCD is sort of a higher document which covers multiple elements, and housing is only one. So I think that having the affordable housing plan be updated every 5 years is good, but the plan shouldn't now be tethered to that the plan could be updated when it feels it's necessary, and to maintain symmetry between both, but also maybe a little bit of creative difference between the two in terms of the best way to address these issues. So I think I'm going to try to get that point across. As Matt pointed out, affordable housing plan is every 5 and the POCD is every 10. And we'd like to maintain coordination between the two of them to the extent possible.
I think that's good.
Go ahead, Karen.
I think it's very good thinking, Glenn. I like the way you present that. I think that's really, well, everyone else agrees too. So I don't think they should be tied together.
Got it.
As long as we promise to call it a housing plan and not an affordable housing plan.
I'm sorry, Matt. I've worked on a number of these, and the terminology does flip flop back and forth. Next comment I have is,
I gave Donna and David a hard time at one of the meetings, and they would be mad at me if I didn't give you a hard time too.
There you go. Thank you. The next comment here is number 82. It seems too detailed for me for the POCD, but this is sort of a concept from Kent Affordable Housing, which they have identified areas between the transfer station, public works, the tennis courts, et cetera, which could be combined by stealing a little bit of land from everybody for affordable housing. And again, I think it's a concept that certainly could be explored, but I don't think the POCD necessarily needs to get to that level of detail or recommendation.
I don't think any of that belongs in here.
I agree. It belongs in the housing plan, maybe, and then an accurate depiction of the town-owned property also would be reasonable.
So that probably ties into the next comment, which is number 83 on the top of page 15. And I think, again, Kent Affordable Housing was sort of looking at the public works facility. There are space constraints there. There's a lot kind of going on. And they said, well, maybe we should start thinking about relocating that facility. They don't need to be as close to the town center and an area with public water and public sewer. And I think what they're kind of hinting at is be a great place for housing. But I think that this becomes sort of a bigger issue. We could hint at the concept of relocation or not. What are your thoughts on comment 83?
I don't know where they can relocate.
Over to
The town.
the Berkshire Hathaway place.
Well, if the town wanted to buy it and then put the $2 million to clean it up, it's just, first they have to come up with the money to buy it. And then they have to clean it up. And our town has a very clear history about acquiring land. They never do it. It's been presented to them so many times for so many years, deals that were extraordinary. They don't even own the fields at KCS. It's been a clear history, and unless somebody wants to donate the money to buy the Berkshire transfer station and clean it up, I just don't even, it just seems to be too impossible for this town to get behind an investment like that. And really what we're talking about is the town coming up with that kind of money to buy another piece of land so that affordable houses can be put up. And I know how the vote's going to go.
Yeah. For towns that have done similar types of things, they've sold the parcel to private development where the money that came in for what the site was worth paid for the relocation of public works. And I think, as you point out, Adam, this is a double pay. You got to pay to relocate public works, and then it's going to go for affordable housing. So, they are expecting a land donation or what? So the sense I'm getting here is we're not going to talk about this in the POCD, just slide right past this one.
Is this something that maybe we could say for 82 and 83 that Glenn, you could recommend to Jocelyn that these two concepts are addressed in the housing plan?
I'd be happy to forward those along. Where's the housing plan at, Matt? Are they on us? Thought they were getting close to adoption, but maybe not.
No, they are behind. Oh, Donna's, maybe she's just wiggling her computer. You're just nodding your head.
No, I have an unstable internet connection. That's why I have everything turned off for me. But anyway, Jocelyn sent me a draft of the plan to review prior to their meeting on Wednesday. I got that today. So it is the Kent Housing Plan draft. She asked me to go through it, give her some comments, and then she's going to present it at their Wednesday meeting.
My understanding is that that they are going to, they're looking to adopt their plan after we complete and adopt the POCD. That's at least the timeline that I remember. So if we're September, they're October.
Yeah, October, November. I thought that Jean said something about she had sent a letter or an email to the Office of Policy and Management or whoever does it. And they gave them an extension to November.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's no need for the two of them to be tied together. I don't know why they would wait for us before going. I think, I believe that the POCD has incorporated the higher level recommendations from the housing plan. And so I don't know if they think we're going to change our wording, or I don't know. But I mean, they don't have to wait for us. I think.
No, I don't think they're waiting on us. I think they're following their process, and their schedule just is pushing them out to. I think we're in sync. I think that the housing plan and the POCD are somewhat understanding where each other is and incorporating as much as we can into the plan and referencing each other's plan.
Yep.
I agree that they don't have to wait for us. We don't have to wait for them. So I would recommend, Glenn, that 82 and 83 get sort of pushed onto the housing plan, and either whether you do that or Donna does that in her comments.
Well, I think let's do this. I think I will send these tomorrow, email to Jocelyn, copy to Donna. Because I think that'll get it to her as quickly as possible. And then she and the housing committee can decide what to do with that. Perfect. I think comment number 91 is where dirt roads end up here. it's being removed from the list of character places, but I think as Wes had pointed out at the public informational meeting, perhaps dirt roads could be studied in the future. I don't know what that study would involve, whether it's, you know, additional maintenance, less maintenance, more maintenance, whatever it might be. But carry that concept forward.
Is there somewhere for us to put, or is it already, you know, in there that dirt roads are add to the rural character of Kent?
So I think I'll make sure I get that statement in. In the transportation section, we already have a discussion of how many, I think it's 25 miles of dirt roads in Kent. And so they're pretty prevalent overall. And so I think further study of this could make sense. And we can add in text that says that these add to rural character. So I think we'll cover that base and then make those suggestions.
And I believe that, you know, that Rick had provided us with some ideas of costs of maintenance, and, you know, the maintenance needed for the 25 miles of dirt roads is significantly less than the cost of maintenance when we start paving and re-oil and graveling them every some years.
Yes, it's far less. I think the next comment is on page 16, top of page 16. And so Jos brought up an interesting question here or comment. In the POCD on the infrastructure plan, we identify the current sewer service area. Somewhere along the way, I think that map was modified to include the areas which are sort of within the Kent Village, but that I think that they're zoned RU1. And so what Jos is suggesting is, well, if they're RU1 and served by sewer, is that what we want? Or should we take those areas out of the sewer service area? Or is there some other element to this I'm just not aware of at the present time in terms of sewer service in the village or these areas which are outside the village? Any thoughts on this one?
I don't think that there's really that many. I mean,
No,
I
there's not.
think there's Amy Voorhees. The beginning of her property is either Village Center Residential 1 or 2, and then the rest of it is in the rural district. And that really had to do with before
Oh, we lost you. Donna.
490.
Okay.
Or not, was it the elevation? Yeah, the elevation was kicking in, and that's what was turning it into rural. So, and Amy, I believe, hooked up to the sewer not too long ago. So I don't see where I don't understand why he thinks that's such a big deal when it really is maybe 2 or 3 houses at most.
All right, so the notation I've made here is no change.
I also feel like that would be something that if we were really looking to discuss making a change like that, that's a discussion that we should have with the sewer commission and see what they have to say about that. I'm not sure that any of us are really qualified that we're so up on the future sewer system to make that decision without discussing that with the sewer commission.
Agreed.
I'm ready to move on to the last page, page 17. So this is a comment in terms of turning the POCD into actions. The POCD advocates for implementation. I think it sort of suggests ways to proceed, and it's really going to be up to the commission in terms of overseeing plan implementation, but I think I kind of take a look at that text, but I don't think there's any major changes that need to be made. Is the subcommittee comfortable with the implementation text, which is on page 102 and 103 of the draft? Are you okay with that?
I am, yes.
And then the comment was made from Ken Affordable Housing, comment number 100, about sort of almost scheduling in reevaluation and revisions of the zoning regs every 5 years. And I think it doesn't necessarily need to be scheduled. We'll do it as necessary.
Yeah, and this is a lot of what I was, or this is part of what I was thinking about earlier about the every 5 years. So it's, we're required to update our regulations. We do an overhaul of our regulations every so many years, right?
Don't know that it's scheduled. It's not statutory. It would be up to the commission to decide, you know, it's time to revisit certain provisions or time to revisit the whole set of regulations. So I don't think it's been done particularly often.
We've allocated some money in our budget, I believe, to look at our regulations, not to do a rewrite like we did before, 7 years ago, whenever it was, but in the years following the immediately following the POCD, to relook at our regulations. And I think that's what, I mean, that's certainly, it seems like that's what we do. The POCD almost, creates the need. It's a relook at our town, and as a result, it's a relook at how our regulations are in our town. And there's a lot of suggestions in here about our regulations. So I don't know if, like I said, I don't think it's a rewrite of the magnitude that we did the last time with you, Glenn, but I think it's a rewrite nonetheless, or an update and a review of our current regulations and some changes.
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to add here is that we anticipate that the regs will be reviewed on a regular basis as circumstances dictate.
Okay, great. I'm in.
Well, I mean, can you say something like, the planning and zoning regulations is a flowing document?
Yeah.
It's never stagnant. It does change sometimes from month to month. I mean, how many changes have we made since we've rewritten it? It was never meant to be a stagnant document. It was always meant to be something that's going to be a flowing, changing document based on the needs of the town and the way that people come forward with their recommendations. So I think that the question about, can you tie into, a time frame to update the regulations is,
My sense is from reading their comments,
I don't think it really deserves an answer because our regulations change all the time.
I think what they were anticipating, Donna, could have been that now that the the housing plan has been done, that the idea would be that the commission would undertake a review of the regulations and undertake those changes, as opposed to a situation that either Ken Affordable Housing or others in town might come to the commission either as an applicant or as a proponent for these changes. And so they wanted a default situation rather than an asking situation. And I think that, again, circumstances will start to dictate how all of this works and then move ahead in that direction. I think most of the other comments here are fairly minor and sort of overall. I think David made a comment about, I guess I tend to use italics, I use quotes around words, and he thinks that for emphasis. And he thought in terms of, usage of the English language, it probably wasn't best. So I'll take a look at every time I use quotes in the draft plan and figure out a better way to address that.
You still have some, what is it? It's not pride of authorship, but you have, the, you can make those decisions, Glenn.
Well,
More eloquent.
Matt, if you had told me in 10th grade I'd be writing documents as part of my professional work, I would never have believed you. So here we go. So I think if the committee is comfortable, my goal will be to take these comments, to go ahead and craft the next version of the plan. All of the changes to date will be quote accepted. Those will go to all black line. So the only changes which will now show up are red line. When the document comes back to you, you'll be able to quickly focus in. And because this is tabulated here by page number, you can go back and say, okay, I understand where this came from and what this is in response to. And then once we've had a chance to do that, I think as the subcommittee, we can get the full commission together. So I think I'll get started on this and then work with Donna to find a meeting date for us to get together. Give you about at least a week, if you will, to review that document. We could pick a date now, except I don't know exactly how long it's going to take me. So let me get it done and then we can talk about dates from there. Does that sound like a plan?
That sounds good to me.
Perfect.
So then we will, so the plan is then we'll get together as a subcommittee one more time, or, you know, until we're prepared to send it off to the full commission.
I think that works. If we were to try to go through this report, these 17 pages with the members of the committee, of the full commission, you know, that might take some time. But if we're able to take these comments, integrate them into the document, refine them as necessary, and come back to the full commission, which is, this is the subcommittee's recommendation for the commission. We can just focus in then at that point in time on what the changes have been. When the commission's ready, we can make additional changes, and once the commission's ready, schedule it for public hearing. And the only thing, just to remind the subcommittee about, statutes require a 65-day notice period. So even if the commission was to call for, you know, adoption mid-August, you couldn't have the public hearing until mid-October. So there's a 65-day statutory wait period on that. So I'll get onto this as quickly as I can so that we can keep moving along.
I think that also falls with what, you know, our discussion with the whole commission, which was that we should get the POCD to a place that it's finished, and our subcommittee has looked and said, this is the finished document that we're presenting to the commission.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'm in.
Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I think I just closed my agenda. No, I didn't. So so we made it through 4A and then slipped into 4B, which is the scheduling of the next meeting. And I think we all are on the same page as to what the next steps are. So the next agenda item is the one that we've been looking for, which is to adjourn. Glenn, thank you so much. That was, I think the documents that you prepared for the meeting tonight were well laid out and easily understandable, and it made an hour and 40 minutes a reasonable meeting. So thank you again for your.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn. No, I can't do that.
Adam just moved to adjourn. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Donna,
Good night,
enjoy your
everybody.
meeting tomorrow. Glenn, we'll talk
Have a great-
soon. Karen.
Talk
and
to you guys
Adam.
soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.